So welcome, folks. Today is March 22nd. This is the Velero community meeting. I apologize. I need to screen share. Show us how to do that first. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen. If you have not done so, please put yourself as attendee. It just helps us know who's who. So without further ado, we'll dive into status updates. Looks like I'm calling out Daniel as he's updating. Daniel, are you able to give an update, or do you want Fong to go first? And actually, Fong, it looks like yours is more of a discussion topic. So do you mind if you don't mind, I'm just gonna move yours.
I can give the update. Yeah, the one thing I wanna announce or inform other community members is that we, per the internal discussion, we have made the decision that we will GA the CSI plugin for the phase 1, which means we GA the functionality that does not require data movement. We're gonna GA the CSI plugin in the form of the current design, the backup item action, restore item action, and delete item action. We have done some tests and pull out a list to fix the issues we think that are important. So this is the list as it's in the link, as it's also shown in Eleanor's screen. So we're gonna fix this. The estimation is that we're gonna fix it in around 4 or 5 weeks. So I think can be done before the planned FC date. A request to the community member is that if you think there are any additional issues that are important for the CSI plugin, please feel free to ping us on the Slack channel or add me in the GitHub to make sure that those are in our radar, and we'll re-estimate and see if we can also prioritize them. So to provide a better functionality for the CSI plugin. Yeah, that's for the CSI plugin. And another thing is
I'll just note just quickly for the CSI plugin, if you want to see that list later, if you have forgotten the label, if you go, just a reminder, our roadmap is accessible if you go to the wiki and then to the sidebar. And so for that item for the CSI plugin for notes, that's where I put this list of issues. So if you want to find it later, or you can just look at the community notes. Yeah. Daniel, please continue.
Yeah, another item I didn't put in the HackMD doc is that I'm reviewing Dave's PR. Yeah, it's a large one, and I haven't been looking at it for some time, so it still needs some time for us to finish. But yeah, just shout out to Dave. Thanks for his effort to continue working on that. Yeah.
Great. I see Dave might not be here now. Interesting. No, but he definitely was Slack. Anyways, keep going. I can ping him just to remind him that we're on now, because I think he was planning to attend.
Yeah, that's all I have.
Great. Any other status updates folks want to do, or shall we move on to discussion topics? Okay. Now, may I suggest that we, first of all, time box, because we've got 3 big items. I don't know how big the version plugin is, but plugin versioning is, but I want to make sure we have time for everything. First of all, Fong, I think we can definitely do plugin versioning first, since you actually had it before I put the other 2 on. Shall we estimate?
No, just talk about for 5 minutes.
Yeah, okay. So, well, I'll stick to it. Let's time box it to 10 minutes. We'll definitely cut off discussion at 10 minutes, and then we'll kind of divide the rest of the time between Copia and DataMover, if that's okay with folks.
Yeah.
Perfect. So why don't we do a plugin versioning first? So tell me, and I'll set a timer. Tell us what you want to chat about.
So basically, I think Daniel already merged in the design doc for the versioning, right, Daniel? Yeah. So I think the next step is we're gonna start to implementing it. But whether we want to make it go into this release, I think we should do that for the next release, because we might not have time to do it for this release, right? What do you think?
Yeah, that depends, because in the Velero team in VMware, I think we will be focusing on the CSI plugin and the Copia and DataMover stuff. So
okay.
Yeah, because
I think we discussed earlier. I think Scott and I post on the the slash that we want to first refactor the code to make sure it is still working with the existing one first, right? We refactor, we put it into like a version 1 directory, and we make sure that it's still working with the current plugin. That is the first thing we want to do. And that one will not introduce, should not introduce any break or anything like that yet before. And then we will, after that one coming in, merging and everything, right? And then we will start adding version 2. So that alone, I think the first one alone might take about a month to do all that work. What do you guys think? Should we do this in this release, or we should do that after in the next?
I mean, I think in general with this kind of thing, I mean, when you start implementing a feature, you start implementing it. Whether it's going to make it into this release or next is something we don't necessarily. I mean that's a roadmap question, not so much a development question in terms of what you work on right now, unless there's other priorities. Meaning that, if you on one extreme, if a week from now, and I know that's not going to be the case, it's done, then probably there's time to get it in and test it for 1.9. But if it takes 3 months to get this PR written and approved and merged, then it wouldn't. So I think there's a roadmap question, but I think in terms of what you do to start implementing it, I think we can get started on that based on just what's in main right now. But I think to your previous point about I think the first PR to put together to get merged is going to be introducing the concept of plugin versioning and declare all the current plugins to be version 1 without adding a version 2 of anything, to make sure that, like you said, everything works with the infrastructure around versioning for version 1 of everything, so that all of the everything works. And in terms of version 2, I don't think we're going to make a version 2 of everything. We only need to increment those plugins where we have the changes to. So if no one's changing backup item action, for example, if we're not adding it, then we don't have a version 2. We'll just stick with version 1. We only need to make a version 2 for those plugin interfaces that we actually need to change. So, whatever those may be.
Okay, in that case, I'm gonna start create a brand and for refactoring to make sure the version 1 working. I'm gonna start this week, and whatever. Let's see how far we can go with that one, and then after that, if we can merge that in, then we talk about adding version 2 afterward, right?
Right, and again, the version 2 discussions are going to be based on what features we need to add that change the versioning. So that's the timeout stuff you're talking about, and then there's the additional items readiness code that I need to add. So I know those are as far as I know, those are the only 2 things that we know we're adding to the plugin versions right now. So that's And is the change you're making, is that to restore item action, or is that other plugins? I don't remember which plugins were affected there.
Backup item. I only
okay, just backup.
Yeah,
okay.
But
Got it. Okay, so
let's start on refactoring the code first, and then
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, the nice thing about that too is that when we start talking version 2, there's one set of changes for backup item action version 2 that's kind of driven by your requirements, and then there's the restore item action version 2 that I need. So those 2 pieces of work are then independent, creating version 2 for backup item action and version 2 for restore item action. So those can be done kind of separately from each other once the V1 stuff is all in place. And it may be that the infrastructure makes it into the next release, although I don't know that at this point, but the actual V2 implementations may not make it until a subsequent release, because they're really independent. You can do those at the same time. We can, whatever next release that includes versioning could include a V2 for some things, but it doesn't have to. It could be that a release includes just the infrastructure around versioning and the V1 for everything, but it's just the next release that actually adds a V2 for something, depending on, again, when things are ready and done.
Okay, I will continue talking to you offline on implementing the refactoring first. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah,
okay.
If you have anything, the phone and Sky, if you have anything you want to discuss, please make it public on the Velero dev channel, and involve me
sense.
and Wen Kai, because we're going to be reviewing the PR as well.
Yep.
And one more thing, as for the V2, what change needs in the V2 API? Have that all been discussed already? Because after I joining the Velero, I don't think anything has discussed like how the V2 should look like.
We did discuss back then, but I think I can restart the conversation again. That's with our
Yes.
yeah.
For the backup item. And
Let's continue. I'm gonna post on Slack on the Velero
Yeah.
Dev channel,
Great.
and
Yeah,
definitely I will enroll you in one time.
Yeah.
yeah.
Because
And again,
please go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I have a concern because, for example, you have a change in backup item action. You want to add, say, a context in the parameter. But will that only happen in backup item action? Should we also add them to the restore item action or delete item action to, for consistency? That's something we need to think about.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah, that makes sense. And to answer the question on the restore item action change that I was talking about, I need to check the design. I had an approved design doc, and then I think there was a PR to change it. Again, it doesn't address specific. I got to go back and look at it because I think that design doc does mention the change to the interface that would be needed, but that's obviously not in the context of the plugin versioning. So that probably needs a separate design doc specific to the plugin versioning change. And also this relates to Feng's point about, and in terms of implementing this, the first iteration of plugin versioning is just to get the infrastructure in place to support versions at all and make everything a V1. I think in parallel to that, we can get the design, discussions going for any interface changes we want for V2. So we can work on the V2 design while the infrastructure for V1 is being put in place, but we wouldn't actually start implementing those until the infrastructure and the V1 stuff is all done.
Yeah, sounds good.
But yeah, that's a good point. We should be probably going forward with the design for the specific changes to specific plugins that we're envisioning for V2s kind of now, so that's ready to start implementing once we get the Feng's PR merged.
Okay.
So on my side, I will hopefully over the next week or two put together, try to collect the aspects from that prior design that actually involve versioning changes and try to get that into a separate design specific to a change we want to make for restore item action. And I think on the context part that Feng's talking about, if it makes sense to add that same change to other plugin types, that might make sense as well for consistency, as long as there's a valid function for that context there that makes sense to have. I mean, I don't think we should add it, if it doesn't help us anywhere, but if it's going to help plugin authors do similar things to what you want to do for backup item action, then that might make sense to kind of as part of the same work, add it to others.
Okay. I'm done. Elena, you can start with the next topic.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's figure out, by the way, who's doing the review on PRs? Daniel, are you putting that in, or is that a different person?
Which one?
Someone's adding stuff for review on PRs, and I was wondering, Daniel, is that you or is that someone else?
Not me.
I'm the one who added it. Sorry.
Great. What I'm trying to figure out is timing. Tell you what, let's time box. I don't know. You know what? We'll just keep it a little bit open-ended. My concern is that DataMover, I think, can take up as much time as we want. So I'm inclined. So just so folks know today, what we're thinking of, I've talked to Dylan, and he at least can stay after this meeting, as can I. So our thought is to maybe start the DataMover discussion last, and then folks who want to stay on can go late, and we'll of course record so that folks who don't want to continue to stay on can watch it later. So I think I'm going to reorder it like this, if folks are okay.
Yeah. So I would say that the non-DataMover PRs are probably quick things to bring up. I would imagine if we could time box those, and then the DataMover design PR can be folded into that DataMover discussion.
Yeah.
Perfect. I like that plan a lot. Good. Okay. And so Copia either can be a lot or a little. So let's start and we'll kind of see where the discussion goes. And we'll go from there. So just to remind folks, we have on our 1.9 roadmap, one of our items is to investigate Copia and see whether we might want to replace Rustic with Copia. And so I think it was Ming and Younghui. I'm so sorry if I got it wrong. I know it was Younghui and I think it was Ming as well. Worked on this overview. I'll put this in the chat and I also put it on the roadmap. So if anyone wants to look at this. So I think the question is, have people, basically we are leaning towards replacing Rustic with Copia. I think well, actually let me stop. Younghui or someone else from the Velero vSphere team, does anyone want to say what we're leaning towards? And I'd love to hear what others think about it.
Yeah, I think we are leaning towards replacing Rustic with Copia. But one thing I would like to point out is in our discussion, we also talk about what should be the backup repo for the data movement. And it seems it makes sense to introduce this unified, a little bit more unified data path to use Copia as a backup repo for the data movement. So there is some dependency in terms of the implementation when we want to deliver all the functions. Just want to point that out.
And to be clear, you think it's worthwhile, it's better to be working on the DataMover work and the Copia replace, or the putting in Copia at the same time, because they'll depend on each other. Like, you like that we're working on them together, or you wish that they were separated?
Yeah, I like the fact, I like we work together. I mean, I like we work together on them, but I just want to point out there is some dependency. So for example, if the data mover, we make a quick progress, but then if we decide that the data mover will depend on the Copia, the data mover cannot be delivered without we finishing the Copia Rustic work.
I see. Okay, good call out. I know that the OADP folks specifically want DataMover. I wonder whether that will, I guess we've talked about more if we get the design. So I guess question for the OADP folks, will that be a blocker for you? Or if we get the design done for DataMover, you guys can go ahead, do your work. And if we're a little delayed due to Copia integration, will that be okay for you? Or you can think about it and get back to us.
Yeah.
And that question kind of assumes that we've already decided that we are going to replace Rustic with Copia.
Well, that's my question. I want to hear if there's objections, let's talk through them. But today is a day, like, if there's no objections, I think we want to start planning to do Copia if there are no objections. But absolutely, you're right. So Scott, like, I don't know if you have objections.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I didn't have a lot to say there. Yeah.
Another thing I want to emphasize is we just want to use Copia as a unified repository for all data movers. So that is so we can consider the data mover based on this. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
And
so
so
I
sorry,
don't,
you keep.
I don't know that anybody
you go.
wants to keep Rustic, do they? Is anybody voting to keep Rustic? Going once, going twice. So I'd say the general consensus is we should move forward with replacing Rustic, and Copia looks like a good replacement.
And just to be clear, at one point, this was probably a year ago, I remember there was discussion about the Rustic replacement discussions kind of centered around making it pluggable so users could replace that with something else. And it sounds like we're not talking about that at this point. We're talking about ripping out Rustic completely and replacing it with Copia. So, Velero version N-1 will have Rustic but not Copia, and version N will have Copia but not Rustic.
Well, I would like to see that there's a pluggable repository model, and that Copia is a reference implementation of that, but that we could, for example, replace that with the Veritas one. And I asked Amber to make it. Amber Vet is the lead over at Veritas. He's in India though, so he wasn't able to make the time. Yeah. But they're definitely an interested party. I think from the Kasten side, we'd like to look towards shared infra, and especially like on vSphere. So TKGS is driving us nuts, and we'd like to not have to implement our own data mover for TKGS, but we'd like to have something that we can plug into that VMware ships.
Yeah.
Would be our goal.
So we probably would not be implementing a pluggable, a Rustic implementation for this plugin, but if some third party really wanted to stick with Rustic, they could use this pluggable framework to implement Rustic for it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, you know, running Rustic versus running Copia for a file system level backup, it's really not that different. Where it gets interesting is when you do non-file system things, when you store blobs into it, and that's where Copia makes it better. And there's actually changes we're pushing. So Kasten is pushing changes into Copia to handle change block tracking and basically large blobs going into it better.
Yeah, actually make a pluggable repository. It's also the goal we discussed internally. And for the first phase, we will just introduce the Copia, but we will introduce a unified, plugin and interface architecture, so that in future any other kind of repository, like any backup repository or any other open source repository can be plugged in. That is the entire.
So we have that, and that's Astrolabe. And there's already a demo of the Copia backend for Astrolabe.
Actually, we haven't discussed, the detailed the interface or something like that internally.
You can look at it. It's done. It works. We've been using it. So just you should at least look at it before deciding that you want to go off and do something completely different.
Okay.
So, and there's, again, sorry if this, I just scanned the document. I don't see it here, but maybe this is already addressed. But one of the things in the past I know we've done is, a backup done on Velero 1.7, for example, should work fine to restore on Velero 1.8. I'm assuming that with the switch from Rustic to Copia, we would be explicitly not backwards compatible in terms of Rustic backups from the old versions.
I think there will be a couple of minor versions that we need to make sure that if user are backup, using the Rustic can be restored. That we have to ensure that. But I think in the installation, maybe I'm not thinking through all the details, but in the installation, maybe we let user to choose to use Rustic or Copia in a couple of
so that would mean, version 1.10 or whatever Velero released and implements this would actually have to have all of the Rustic bits still in there and the Copia bits. So we would be supporting both at the same time in the same release.
So maybe Rustic only for restore. You might not be able to make new backups into Rustic.
That might make, that's true. So I guess that's the question: is that one of the goals that we're trying to preserve here? Are we going to tell users that they have to restore to, restore with an old Velero and then back up again with a new one, or are we going to allow Rustic restores kind of for some transition period? But yeah, you're right. We wouldn't need Rustic backups at that point if the plan was to eventually, get rid of it. But
people will push and say, geez, you should be backwards compatible with your older backups.
Right.
I think we also have to look at how much work it really winds up being.
Yeah, and this is especially an issue given that we're trying to, in some cases by necessity, like the V1, Beta 1 API, the CRDs, but also just from a supportability point of view, we're not supporting, Kubernetes 1.11 through 1.22, in the same release now. So if we're saying that's okay because your old backups can use the old Velero and you can restore on the new Velero, that becomes a problem if your old backups are using Rustic and in your cluster that doesn't, that the latest Velero won't support, and you're trying to move over to the newer cluster.
I think it definitely, it sounds like, Daniel wants to go in that direction. I think it's definitely the direction we would want to go in unless it's completely infeasible, but I don't see why, because we already have all the Rustic restore code. If you take it out of the backup side, it's probably not that big a deal.
Yeah, as long as the way you implement the Copia or this pluggable thing with Copia, kind of tied into it, because now on a restore, you've got, snapshot restore, Rustic restore, and this new pluggable restore, Copia restore. So you've got multiple things. So you do have more things to worry about in terms of annotations and and what mode you're in, because the whole like default to Rustic versus default to not Rustic, that's a Boolean basically right now. And now we're going to having 3.
If we design our APIs right, we can stick with 2, where we treat the repository as a repository of snapshots. And we just have 2 different ways to restore from snapshot, but it should be the same thing. Either it's a local snapshot or it's a snapshot that's in the repo.
Now, I just want to pause and ask a question because I want to be cognizant of the other things we want to do today. Do we feel like we have enough agreement for whomever on the team will be working on Copia a bit more to kind of move forward, think more about a design, think more about, I mean, obviously I should probably think about this too, kind of requirements for users. Like basically, do we want to discuss more today or do we feel like we've covered major objections? We've called out 2 good points, which is pluggable repo model and kind of backwards compatibility, and then maybe we can come back to this in a couple weeks and dive deeper once we've done some more designing. I guess the question is, do we know enough to do next steps thinking about these, or do we need to dive deeper on this discussion today?
I just want to point out the pluggable repo was, we discussed it, but it was optional. Does it mean that we have to do pluggable repo?
I mean, you don't have to do anything, but I think it'll be a lot easier if you make it pluggable, because then, you have the option to change it out with something else. And it's also, it's definitely more palatable from the Kasten point of view. And I think, like Veritas would probably want to have that as well.
Because in terms of the detail in the design, we can make some hardcore logic for Copia, or we make everything pluggable. That's totally different in terms of effort, right?
I don't think it's going to be that different. I mean, why would it be, if you start hard coding things for Copia, what makes it easier to hard code things?
Yeah, that's a gut feeling, because currently, for example, in the backup status, or when you describe backup, you have this Rustic chunk as an example. We can add a Copia chunk. But in the pluggable design, that won't work. We need some other way, right? That's just one example. I assume there are other parts we need to think about. That in the implementation, it's quite different if we decide to go the pluggable model.
I mean,
yeah. Sorry, you go, Dave, first.
Well, no, I'm just thinking that, we want to put other things in besides file systems. So, we're talking about like Cassandra, for example, streaming directly in. So you're probably going to want to have a repo API of some form. It's not going to be straight Copia. And once you've built that API, it's like, why not abstract it out enough that you can, switch it around.
And another thing, Dave, you mentioned the.
Scott, you might want to mute yourself, or maybe I can hear you typing.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
As for the astrolabe example, could you let us know the repo, the URL? We can take a look at the reference.
Yeah, it's in the demos. Let me pull it up. I'll put it in the chat.
More generally, I think a question too, especially if we might be putting a Kasten repo in or a Veritas repo. Dave, I don't know if you'd have any availability to kind of help out with the design a bit, if this would be helpful. Daniel, you tell me, or maybe Amber as well. Basically, folks who are more familiar with other repos that we might want to plug in, I have to imagine that might help as we're designing, if we're designing a repo API.
Yeah, I would like to, either myself or I get some of the other Kasten folks in, because I think one of our hot buttons is Supervisor Cluster with vSphere. And how do we back things up without us building a whole bunch of weird stuff in Supervisor Cluster? So it'd be nice if we could share VMware infrastructure like a DataMover that gets put into Supervisor Cluster, and we could use that rather than having to install our own up there.
Why would that? Sorry, what does that have to do with the repo? Is it because of the DataMover has? Is it because you could plug the DataMover repo in?
So we have 2 backends. So one is Copia that sits on top of object stores. The other is integrated with Veeam Backup Repository, and so we need to be able to use either backend.
Okay, and those backends are repos, basically, or no?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, those backends would be. So you can think. So if we have like a repo API where we can put BBR behind it, it actually gets kind of interesting. And the other thing we can do is we can also start to promote the repo API out to other people. So like they can back up their operator, for example, and go directly into the repo rather than having us move the data for them. Possibility.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Well, Daniel, let's talk a little more. I mean, let's think about this. I think that we can kind of, I hear some good reasons to do a pluggable repo, especially if I'd love to hear your thoughts on if we do have help from the Kasten folks and ideally from maybe the Veritas folks as well, whether that can take, there might be increased effort to design this, but if we've got more architectural help or coding help, that might balance things out. So we can think about that.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, but just want to point out, then things get a little bit more complicated in terms of, implementing the whole DataMover end-to-end scenario, right? Just want to point out that may need a bit more time if we decided to go the pluggable approach.
Yeah, I think maybe we need to know how the things like Veritas or Kasten, how they use Copia. Sorry, how they use Velero, right? So Dave, maybe we can ask you first. How will the Kasten use Velero? You just said.
Yeah, so currently we don't, right? And that's actually, so we were discussing before I moved over, there was a discussion of collaborating together on the Astrolabe layer. And that's been a little bit of a hot button from the Kasten side because Kasten feels that Velero is a backup product and putting Kasten or K10 and Velero kind of working with each other is a little weird. Whereas like Astrolabe was positioned as an infralayer. And that was like, yeah, K10 uses Astrolabe, Velero uses Astrolabe. That was more palatable. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to be moving forward in terms of how we design out the infra stuff so that we can push things down to Kubernetes, use more community-based stuff for these low-level things. Veritas is embedding Velero, as is Dell EMC, as is a number of other people. So they need to be able to do things like get Velero to work with their repository directly. So that's something we should get. I'd really like to see more input from the people who are actually embedding Velero into these designs. And so that's something I think we need to reach out a little bit more. Sukarna's not here today, as you know. So Sukarna from Dell EMC, just the usual suspects.
Okay.
Although we do have a bunch of Dell EMC folk here today, so thank you. That's great to see you all here. So I might suggest, I do think we should put a pin on this just because we have those PRs and we should at least start a little bit of DataMover discussion before. And I added one thing about I realized it's like a meta, how do we have these bigger discussions? So is it okay if we put a pin on Copia for today? We can absolutely continue the discussion next time, but I think that we've gotten some good bits to think about today. So I think Shubham, you put in these two PRs, is that correct? Do you want to either I can let you drive or I can just open the links, whatever you'd prefer.
You can go ahead and open the links.
Okay, great.
So
the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. So this pull request is regarding the design doc which we agreed upon. So this was raised last week. So I wanted to request some reviews on this. It would be really great. This implements the approach number 1 specified in existing resource policy design. And the summary also gives a bit of what is added where. So I would like some review from the developer team.
Has this been reviewed? I know we have like a weekly, at least the VMware folks have a weekly PR review. Has that been reviewed or are we about to have it?
Yeah, in our weekly review, we only review the new PRs. For those ones, like I said, if you want us to take a look, please feel free to ping us. Otherwise, it may easily slip out of the notification. And by the way, I see the reviewers already assigned by the assignee bot. So.
Okay, so 2 good points. One, good for me to know for the future. Okay, so so if it's a new PR, it'll be picked up by the weekly review. If it's a returning PR, we should ping. And then the second question is, so Dave, are you still regularly reviewing PRs? Are we good to leave you on that bot? Are you less involved than before?
I'm probably less involved. I'm not sure if I've got any assigned to me. I probably do, and I haven't looked at it.
Well, this one's assigned to you. So that's what my question is. Like, are you able to keep up with what's assigned to you, or do we need to? Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
move that off, please, because I don't, I don't really have the bandwidth for that now.
Okay. And hopefully can you review PRs that are more related to the more infra layer that interests you more? That's
Yeah.
more, okay. Okay. So to that point then, so Daniel, can we put on someone else who could, I mean, because I'm assuming Scott is review, but I know that Scott has pointed out that if Red Hat folks are reviewing other Red Hat folks, it's nice to have other viewpoints. So basically Daniel, can I ping you in this? Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously I'll review it as well. But we obviously we need a second reviewer.
Exactly.
So Daniel, what should we do? Should I just comment on this, comment you, Daniel, and you'll find someone to do it, or?
Okay, so this one is not the design. This one is for the implementation, right?
Yeah, this is implementation one. This is a new PR.
Yeah. I think we'll discuss offline with other VMware folks and assign someone to review that. Thanks.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I've just commented on it, Daniel, to kind of make it an email in your inbox. So, okay. Good to move on to the next PR then. Is it the same? Well, here, I'll move on to the next PR. Tell me if I went too fast.
Yeah. So this is a different one. It's a design one. So if you move on to the last comment here. Yeah. So I just wanted to know if this is a good idea to go ahead with the implementation. Daniel, is it okay if we just expose the feature via APIs and not via CLI? So, like, wanted to know about that, about your concern.
Yeah, if we
Daniel,
decided to only in the API, it's better, but we need to document really clearly, explicitly.
Yeah, surely. I'll do documentation pull requests.
Yeah. Next time, please. Yeah, maybe that's also my bad because you added me, but I didn't see the notification. If you expect my response, you just ping me on the Slack. You don't need to wait for a full week till next community meeting.
Okay, sure thing. Thank you.
Okay. Are both these PRs resolved then, or do you need anything else for these two PRs?
No, so I just wanted to put that on the map for review, and the second one I wanted to know whether we wanted to like go ahead with the implementation or not. So that's it. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate you asking these questions because I also didn't know how PR reviews were working lately in terms of pinging. So I think it's great that you're asking because now everyone's hearing how to, if they need a PR reviewed, what to do. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And this DataMover design, is this Bridget's original? Oh, no. Okay. Oh, so Shubham, you've put a new design. Is this basically in line with the Dylan's kind of PRD doc?
Yeah,
or is this
if I can just provide a little clarity on this. We want to be kind of clear about what this is. So what we put together in the product requirements doc is basically what we gathered off of trying to prototype a solution here. Shubham's design doc there tries to highlight a lot of the goals that were captured from everyone that commented in that doc, which is excellent. But we also just wanted to include like so we are developing a version of a DataMover for OADP in the meantime. Basically an upstream tool that technically anyone could use. It's not actually related to OADP. It's in a whole separate repository that just tries to solve this from like a pure controller approach. And we just want to detail how that works here in this design. And then the thought was that as the PRD gets discussed and we kind of come to a conclusion as to what exactly this should look like integrated back into Velero, we can keep working to update this. So, and Shubham, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just want to be clear, like there is a lot in this that is really specific to what we're doing right now just to solve this problem in the meantime. But we really wanted to keep this like an open discussion in terms of now you guys can see what we're doing. Let's just have a chat as to how this should go when it gets implemented back into Velero. And this can be like a living, breathing design doc that gets updated over time. So, Shubham, is that all fair? Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off. I want to be clear.
It's pretty much what I wanted to say. It's accurate. So yeah.
And may I ask that right now, let's first see if there's any meta conversation about having this design doc versus elsewhere. I don't want to dive into technical details before we have another meta conversation. And then lastly, we'll dive into DataMover technical details. you'll see why it, yeah. So are there any comments on having this design doc versus the PRD, or are we, now that we've heard the explanation, are we good?
Yeah, because I just wasn't sure if this belonged somewhere else. So we're definitely open to, if we want to take that somewhere else, if we want to put in HackMD, that's fine. Just wanted to kind of explain, this isn't like the full, we've come up with the design. We're not, we're not changing it. It's just kind of a little intro, I guess.
So do you expect this is a fundamental that we keep refining this one particular doc, or it's just something we reference and we work on together on another design?
Yeah, the hope is that we could put it here. If you actually look at this, it's like we try to segment it into what are the high level goals of DataMover and how does this relate to Velero? And then there's just a whole section at the bottom that's explicitly detailing how we're doing this today with FollowSync. So our intention is that we should just put all the work here because the existing DataMover design PR was closed by Bridget. So our hope was that we can just detail what we're doing to explain it. And then hopefully this becomes a document that actually explains the Velero DataMover design. So the whole top level is very generic. It's all Velero specific. The bottom just explains what we're doing today with FollowSync.
I would, on a totally just, again, meta level, you might want to consider putting this in the wiki, only, and I can give you permission if you don't have, I can give permissions, only because I feel like we can't as dynamically kind of make discussions, or actually, never mind, I guess commenting is better. Anyways, never mind. You all, I'll be doing this less than the rest of you, so never mind. Daniel, do you want to respond? Sorry, I jumped in.
No, I think, yeah, we can first check this PR, then decide if we need a new PR for design or we continue refining on it. I think it would be a bit easier if we have a Google Doc to have everything, you know, settled when it's concrete and someone submit a new PR to have all the details. And this one is a reference. We may add some comment in it while we're working on the, you know, the design that will be reviewed and merged. Do you think that sounds like a good plan, Dylan, or do you want to, you know, us keep commenting on this one, refining this one, and have this particular PR merged finally? Which one do you prefer?
I just figured, and again, I don't know what you guys were thinking here, but you know, we have a few engineers that are definitely focusing on this day to day. So we were happy to kind of push forward the design here. Okay. In this document, but if you guys actually wanted to help contribute to that process too, and it makes more sense to do that in Google Docs, that's fine too. We're definitely open to whatever is going to collaborate the easiest. We've always done this in GitHub before, so I didn't know if that made more sense or what do you guys want to do?
Yeah, maybe we can delay the discussion. Probably we can, you know, continue working on this and have this merged finally.
Sure.
Whatever choice we make sure that we keep the history of the discussions so that later on when somebody says, hey, why did you do it this way? We have a track of that discussion that the community can look at. We might find out that we were wrong, but at least we have the reasoning why we chose that to at least one, tell people, and two, for our own sanity when we go back and look at it. I have found that is helpful. So
I totally agree. And that's why I like GitHub for this, for sure. Google Docs, like you're going to lose, you close comments and stuff. It's just, GitHub's always been pretty good for this. You have a whole comment trail and all that stuff. So, but I'm open to ideas.
Yonghui and Wenkai, what do you think? Shall we, you know, continuously commenting or adding stuff in this PR to make it finalized and merged?
Let's give a little time to think about it. I'm not sure if we have to decide literally this minute, but yeah.
Yeah,
but I think that it's good to be thinking about how we work. And really, I think we should try something, and we can always, if it feels very painful, if there's lots of pain points, then we can reopen the conversation. Speaking of kind of pain points, so I have a pain point. We've been wanting to talk about DataMover, and there's a whole bunch of people who need to be involved for the discussion, or I know our stakeholders. And because we're in different time zones, plus scheduling on the fly is quite hard. So I don't quite know the solution. I'm wondering whether we should for as times like these when we seem to have a lot of deeper things that need to be discussed, Copia and DataMover being and frankly, maybe plugin versioning, although that does seem to go faster. I'm just wondering, for instance, I'm wondering, should we reserve the this time but next week potentially as like a longer discussion thing, basically, or maybe it's just for DataMover and Copia discussions. I think right now we don't have anyone in Europe working on that, so this time but next week should work. Is there another time? We can also potentially go after this, although that's quite late for some of us. I don't know. Does anyone have any thoughts? But at least I've tried to organize on Slack and it didn't go very far. And then, I mean, I got some response, but there was no consensus. And then I know Dylan tried, and I want to ask here, do people have preferences?
Yeah, I love the idea of breaking this into a working group so that we don't have to bog up every community discussion with this topic. I think that's a great idea. And I'd also suggest, just because we have engineers in North America that are also interested in this, but they necessarily can't always join these nighttime calls. And we could maybe split it of sometimes it's morning North America time, sometimes evening. Like obviously we're happy to make it work because we're all across the globe. But if we could maybe do half and half, I think that would be cool too.
Yeah, and also I know 12 really doesn't work for people in China in terms of timing at all, but like a morning North America time, you know, a little early, like earlier than our normal North America meeting might work. That doesn't work as much on Pacific time, but I don't know if, you know, so, you know, again, that's the challenge, I guess.
Yeah,
I think no matter what we'd be
recording.
recording. Sorry, someone else.
Yeah.
I was just saying, no matter what we'd record, I will note, but keep going, Dylan. I think you were saying something.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, it's impossible to get everyone, but like even 8 a.m. one week, 8 p.m. for us the next week, and then I think it's 12 hours for Beijing. So would it just be, we're just flipping each time? I don't know.
Yeah, we're at 12 hours right now. So tentatively, especially because we're in planning period, maybe we'll do this exact time next week on the 29th. Plus, I don't know if this would be too soon, but I wonder if we could do for North Americans Wednesday the 3rd. I don't know. Actually, never mind. That's two back-to-back meetings. Maybe Thursday the 31st. I guess I guess the question is, how many meetings do we need and how far advanced do we schedule them? Or we could just do Wednesday the 30th at 8 a.m. But then Dave can't attend. I don't know.
Which 8 a.m. Eastern time?
Oh yes, 5 a.m.
No, I'm not showing up for that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so that's partly my question, I guess. Could we do two back-to-back meetings? So like this time, but next week, so Dave can get his thoughts in, and like the Beijing team can sync with Dave and those in North America who want to come. And then we could actually do a meeting 1 or 2 days later, but 8 a.m. for additional and everyone could watch the recording, and then additional engineers could discuss further. That would give us 2 discussions next week. Hopefully that would help us move through many of our questions. Is that overkill? I don't know. Thoughts?
Yeah, I'm fine because actually the community meeting in Beijing time zone is bi-weekly. So, but we can preserve the, you know, the 8 a.m., 9 a.m. time slot in Beijing. Whenever, I mean, on Wednesday, whenever we are available for the DataMover discussion. I have a bi-weekly meeting on a Friday morning, 8 a.m., 9 a.m. But yeah, but whenever it's, you know, I have a free time slot, I think we can preserve that also for DataMover to make quick progress. So it's the Tuesday and Thursday evening, North America time.
The only problem is I'm hearing that we would love to have one morning North America time to work for some engineers. So maybe we could do Wednesday. Yeah,
I was gonna say the problem is that, you know, this time slot works for most of us, but some of the North America people can't attend this time. So, you know, 8 a.m. would work for them. It would be 8 p.m. in Beijing, but then Dave couldn't join that one. But if we alternated, at least the people that can't come to any of the evening meetings, you know, evening North America meetings, could come to the other ones. And so,
okay.
But I also don't know. I mean, does the 8 p.m. Beijing time work on those days?
Okay, I think I have some consensus actually. Here's what I propose. because we have a lot of discussions going on, I'm going to schedule 2 meetings next week. This time next week, plus I will let Dylan and Scott, and Sean, you can talk to your North American colleagues and figure out whether Wednesday or Thursday works better. Plus I'll talk to the Beijing folks to see if one of them works better in the morning. So I'll do this tomorrow morning. And so basically I'll schedule 2 meetings next week and then we can see which one should repeat the following weeks. We can be checking ahead of time to see who shows up, who will show up, so that we can cancel meetings basically if we're not going to need them. So
Yeah.
keep going, but this is what I'm proposing. Yeah.
No, Eleanor, I think that's a great idea. And I just recommend that on the working group idea, which I love, if maybe we can just like appoint one person per company that can do the scheduling for that entire group.
Oh, good idea.
I'd be happy to do that for the Red Hat side.
Yeah, and Dylan, I would recommend on the Red Hat side that since we're trying to accommodate people that can't come at 8 p.m. our time, let's not do the follow-up meeting the next day at 8 a.m. because they won't have had a chance to watch the recording from the meeting. So
Yeah.
I would say Thursday would be better than Wednesday, so that the people that come Thursday that didn't come on Tuesday will have had a chance to watch the recording, because they won't have done that if we meet at 8 a.m. after an 8 p.m. meeting, 12 hours later.
Yeah.
So let's just ask Beijing folks, can you all, or can the relevant of you make Thursday 8 p.m. your time?
This week?
Yeah, next week, not this week.
Yeah, I think it works for me at least. With 3 of us, I think at least one in the 3 or 4 of us will be able to attend. I think that's
okay.
For
And then great. So good. So that's what I'll schedule next week. We can see how that feels, and I'll kind of schedule another week or 2 out, and we can move them around. This is Eleanor will do this. And then secondly, I think Dylan made a good point about scheduling. I never know who I need to message. So I think for scheduling, kind of working group, at least for scheduling, working group scheduling, Dylan will be for Red Hat. Sorry, did not spell. I will cover VMware, although I may talk to one of the Beijing folks to cover themselves. Dave, I'm assuming, well, actually, I guess I'll just ask, does anyone else here want to represent their company or in these discussions? Should be looped in. Dave, shall I loop you in?
Yes, please.
Okay. Anyone from Dell want to be looped in, or from any other? Sorry if I'm missing anyone. Dell looks like, Dell, do you all want to be looped in, or are you happy to kind of be updated in community discussions?
Yeah, we can be looped in, yes.
So who can you nominate one person that I loop in?
We'll put Sukarna.
Sukarna, perfect. Easy to volunteer him. He's not even here. Perfect.
Yeah, it's easy to boost him.
Perfect. And to Dave's point, Amber, Ved, and yeah, and I'll actually be looping in Xing as well, because she, even though we're both VMware, she kind of represents vSphere in a way that the rest of us do not. Okay. That gives us a little bit of a working group for scheduling, although, of course, I think we should try to do as much of our scheduling and every other discussion on Velero Dev as possible so it's visible. So anyone else want to comment on this kind of scheduling issue, or
Can we create a separate Slack channel, or we put everything in the Velero Dev?
We certainly can. I know who to email on the Kubernetes Slack channel now to do so. Code Ranger, I think is his name. I don't know. How do folks feel? Personally, I don't think there's that much chatter. I think it would be okay to be on Velero Dev, but I'm not a dev, and I defer to the rest of you.
Yeah, I'm fine with Velero Dev. If we have like a set of group of people to talk to, it's easier to like set a thread up. That was the hard part before, was like tagging 10 people. So Velero Dev works for me. That's fine.
Yeah, I'd leave it in Velero Dev until it becomes a problem, and then think about it. But yeah, I don't think it's yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a dead channel at times, so this will actually almost liven it up. But absolutely agreed. If it becomes painful, we can definitely change it. So discussions. Oh, it's so slow. Discussions in Velero Dev. Okay. Great. And now, so the last question then, we're at time. As I've said, we will meet next at this time next week, but that'll be a full week it seems I at least have been trying to write use cases and failing miserably. So I'm going to stay after. It sounds like Dylan can stay after. So I think that Dylan and I alone can have a good conversation, but I invite anyone else who wants to chat about DataMover to stay if you're able. We'll keep the recording running so you can absolutely catch up later if you can't. So without further ado, I'm going to dive into DataMover. Feel free to drop if it's the end of the hour, of course. Good? Comments? Okay. Looks like we're going into DataMover. So at least now this so this is a PRD. If folks don't, I put it in the. So agree. More gifts would be great. Okay, so if you don't have access to this DataMover PRD doc, I think that if you request access, Dylan should be able to give you access. But please, literally speak up now if you want access and you don't.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I missed anyone. I don't know why the permissioning is so difficult on that sheet, but I've been trying to grant anyone that requested.
Yeah, I had read access, but not write, so I couldn't comment.
Oh no!
Right.
So David's right, and then Tiger said he wants access too. So Tiger, why don't you put your email address into the chat, and then that will make it easier.
He's just a goofball. He's got access.
Oh, oh, is he Red Hat? Yeah,
yes.
I can't.
Actually, unless it's possible I screwed up the permissions again when I changed it, though. To be honest with you, I'm not totally sure. I will make everyone at least commenter. And if you want edit access, I'm happy to upgrade it. I just wasn't sure who needed that.
Perfect. So all this is put in the Zoom chat, and I'll call it out if I see it. So just to set the stage, of course, we have to design how the DataMover works, but first we should actually figure out the darn requirements. That's what PRD is, Project Requirements Document. This is a place to list our requirements. At least two ways you can do it. We can list requirements, which is what Dylan started to do. Awesome. I did get an ask from Daniel to try to do use cases, which I tried to do literally right before this meeting. And boy, am I exposing the limits of my knowledge. So we can do two. Personally, I have questions. I want to advance my use cases, but more than that, I just think that there's a number of discussion topics. So, I mean, we can do a few things. I think, what do folks think about maybe going through? I can look at the comments and see if there are open discussions. Maybe I go bit by bit, if that's okay. And if folks, as we're kind of going through, if you're kind of want to add a comment, we can do that. Or we could do a silent, I don't know. Are folks okay with that? Maybe I start with the comments and going through, or do we maybe want to go section by section and take comments as necessary? Okay. If there's no, well, actually, let's start with this. OED, basically there had been a goal listed here. It was very OADP specific. And so I thought it'd be worthwhile to call it the Velero goal as well. I put it first since we're the Velero team, and then OADP is some of us care about. And then certainly we can have others, for instance, Xing might add a vSphere specific goal if needed. So let's do as I said. You can start to read through this. Okay, so let's go bit by bit. And I think that this one, for instance, is an open discussion. So I think I will talk through that if that's okay. And as folks want to, maybe you can add comments later on, and that's how we can, basically, I think we can use comments to have an orderly discussion, if that's okay with folks. Okay, so first of all, Daniel, Daniel made this point. He wants to clarify the EtoE scenarios. He asked if a user creates a backup, takes a snapshot, why does he want to move the snapshot to another cloud provider while the backup itself is not moved? Oh, good. This is the first question I had. When a snapshot is moved, how could it be consumed by the end user? So I have two questions for that. Let's see what, I basically agreed with him about use cases. Let's see what Dylan said. The promise of CSI in the long term is to make snapshot storage agnostic, so that a snapshot isn't tied to a specific vendor. The current backup restore flow in Velero restores the PVC as is. DataMover can abstract this functionality to restore any type. I halfway understand that answer. Let me though first ask, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask Daniel, what do you mean that this, I agree that the snapshot is moved. For example, we take an EBS snapshot and then we might want to move it to Azure Object Storage. let me ask a quick question, actually. When we're doing CSI snapshotting and we have a data mover, are we assuming it'll move it and put it into a data store, or are we assuming that the repo will determine if it's a data store, sorry, an object store or a block store?
Could you repeat your question? I didn't.
I know I asked like 5 questions. I have sorry, I'll ask my question later. I want to ask your question first, or I'll ask you a question about your question. So you're saying you take an EBS snapshot and then it's moved to Azure. What do you mean that the backup itself is not moved? What do you mean the backup Velero backup CR? Do you mean, are you including the Kubernetes resources?
Yeah, the way I think of the process is how Velero user could use this feature. And if I take a CSI snapshot using Velero backup, so the backup tarball, which includes all the metadata, remains in the S3 storage. Then you say you want to move the snapshot of the EBS from S3 to Azure. So that's a little confusing. I'm not sure how a user would consume this snapshot after it's moved to Azure. And as for Dylan's point, because currently, does it mean, do you imply that we also need to update the way user to interact with Velero in the restore sub command? Because currently,
wait. Actually, wait, Daniel, can we pause? I just want to go one bit at a time so we can go through. So quickly to respond to yours, that's an excellent question. So your point is, we know the snapshot is moving to another location. What's happening with the Kubernetes resources? So I want to ask, I think that's a pretty important thing to call out first. Do other folks here, have they thought about this? What to do with the Kubernetes resources? Is it acceptable to, Dave, you go.
That's our basic migration thing right now with Rustic, is you would back up using Rustic and Velero into S3, for example, and then you could restore that into Azure. Right, that currently works. We tell people it works.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's very similar to that workflow. It's a big plus one to me. That's how I've been envisioning it.
Does that answer the question, Daniel?
I'm sorry, my internet just went out. I didn't hear anything Dave said. Do you mind saying it really fast?
I was just saying that's the current migration use case with Rustic.
Okay, gotcha.
But after the movement, I mean, I have 2 copies of the snapshot, right? Or by movement, you mean I move the snapshot from EBS to Azure, so the snapshot on EBS will no longer be used.
We could do both.
I mean, if we do both, we need to explicitly tell Velero which one to use when we are restoring, right?
I actually think there's a misunderstanding here, because if you think about the Rustic scenario, we're not talking about moving snapshots across buckets and object storages. What we're talking about is I have a PVC that's on EBS storage. I back up, I take a snapshot. That snapshot gets moved to object storage, and now I want to take that snapshot and consume it on a different storage provider. So I want to create an Azure volume and restore from this given snapshot. It's not about moving the snapshots across object storage.
So you could actually do both. So what we currently do is we have 2 paths. We take a snapshot and we leave it in the storage system, or we push it to EBS, or not to EBS, we push it using Rustic into something. So one path that we can do is we can keep local snapshots, for example, to do quick restores, and also make another copy into an object store. So you could potentially have multiple copies of the snapshot, and the snapshot data should be immutable. And then we've got 2 different paths for copying out the snapshot data. One would be a straight file system copy like we do with Rustic, which we could also do directly with Copia. Another path is we take the raw blocks, which we can do with, say, VADP or EBS Direct. We could also back end those into Copia and have Copia manage the incrementals and differences in the object store. So I think we should be supporting both of those paths. I think Daniel's question is like, so once you've moved the snapshot around, what does that mean? And I think that's really like, how do we name or identify snapshots? And how do we, like, for example, like we should be able to move a backup, not just the snapshot, but the whole backup from one object store to another at some point. When you do that, there's probably some translation that would have to happen, or the object IDs have to be mapped somehow. So like an object ID, maybe there's a repo that you're pointing to and the object ID simply is there in that repo, and you could point to a different repo and the object ID would remain the same. That's a possibility.
Yeah, I think
Is that helping?
Yeah, sorry. I think they would make a good point. It may be something naming we need to change. It is not move a CSI snapshot to another cloud. It is move a backup. The backup maybe include all the data in this station. I mean, in this backup station, and also the metadata weight. So
that's
if this
beyond the original scope of the DataMover.
So
yeah, I think
if I
that
could
is another scenario, maybe beyond DataMover. It is another kind of DataMover. It is more like a data replication from one side to another side, from one cloud provider to another cloud provider, similar like that. But in this DataMover scenario, and I think previously Daniel also mentioned another case. It is migration, right? So we can use this movement if we can provide the ability. It can, can migrate the backup. To restore to another cloud provider. From
So definitely right now we can do
spread.
that. It doesn't. So right now Velero doesn't have any mechanisms to move backups. Once they land in an object store, they're going to stay there. But we do have the ability to restore from pretty much any object store we have credentials to if the data is there.
Yeah, I think there's two scenarios. One is about the backup replication from one side to another side. Yeah. Another scenario is about recovery. When you, restore or recovery, you restore to another provider. To support the cross provider, cross cloud provider like that.
Can we explicitly state that one of those use cases is out of scope? I think that the idea of moving backups between object stores is not the goal of the data movement. My understanding of data movement is much more focused on less focused on cloud snapshots and more focused on other data provider snapshots. CSI snapshots that do actually live locally, right? Clouds snapshots live in the cloud and therefore are like persisted across.
We got an awful lot of requests, for example, like because the snapshots are per region, that people wanted to take a snapshot and put it somewhere else.
I don't disagree. What I'm trying to get at is that the idea is moving that data inside that snapshot somewhere else to keep it safe, right? That's really what the DataMover, from my understanding, is really trying to provide, right? There's probably some sub-use cases in here, I don't disagree, but if we can keep the high level goal here, I think that will help explain it. So we're not, what I'm trying to do is rescope it so that we can get one use case written down that is solid, that we understand, descope all the other pieces, parts of it, and we can add those back as we go, right? I don't know if going through all the sub use cases and all of the edge / other things is going to help us move it forward in this particular path, because it is such a intractable problem in a lot of ways. It is a very large problem with lots of sub use cases, with lots of things that we got to think about. So I'm not saying that we don't need to go through them. I'm just saying, can we get the most basic one down first before we dive into all of the other ways that we could use this feature? Because I think I'm getting lost in all of the edge cases, sub use cases, all this other stuff. I don't know if anybody else is. Maybe I'm just the only one that's unable to follow.
Sean, I agree with a lot of what you were saying there. And I also wanted to add, as in terms of scoping this to a specific goal, my understanding was always that this is needed to bring the CSI plugin to GA, right? So if we're going to start discussing moving backups, we're going to start talking about moving, and again, actually the CSI coming at this from the CSI angle, you can actually support the cross-region cloud provider snapshot bit, right? So I've always been envisioning this as like scoped down to CSI snapshots themselves.
Well, I think we've got to maintain some backwards compatibility. And the other thing is we have to deal with different storage providers behind the CSI snapshotting. So we need to have things like direct data paths, because like in vSphere, taking a snapshot and cloning it is going to kill us.
Dave? I think that that's like a really good point for a technical thing, but can you help me understand how that relates to like the larger conversation here? Like the need for like that particular piece of the API needs to be there for like a specific use case. I don't disagree, but for the larger goal that we're trying to do, does that need to be included in this requirement for the
at the top level? Yes.
Case?
Yes, at the top level, we have to be able to do block level backups using the existing APIs. So that's above and beyond what CSI provides. Otherwise, it's going to be dead in the water on vSphere. It's not a great solution for most cloud providers. It works with certain on-prem disk arrays that do quick snapshot, clones.
Wait, let me pause there because that's something that's new to me, or like I want to ask. Okay, so you're saying, Dave, that say AWS and Azure, you're saying do kind of their version of CSA snapshotting is kind of different from.
It's not the CSI snapshotting, it's the how do you extract data. So there's one path that's standard in CSI, and that is take a snapshot, and then you can clone the snapshot and attach the snapshot, and then you can extract the data. But that limits you in a couple of ways. One is that you've got to clone the volume. And depending on the platform, that may be very expensive. And vSphere in particular is extremely expensive because you copy every block before you even start being able to read data from it. And, on the cloud providers, it's like, yeah, you got to pay for a disk that has a terabyte worth of space allocated for however long it's there while you're backing it up. And if you go through the file system API, we don't get change tracking. So we have to do block level. So in order to without going at the block level, we have to descend the file system tree, look at each file, see what's different, and back it up in order to get a differential. That even the change block tracking that's being proposed in the working group is block level stuff. So block level access is kind of a must.
And here's another question, a follow-up that I think might be relevant. Obviously, we have vSphere, VMware care about vSphere, maybe a bit more than other folks. So making it more compatible with vSphere is something we'd like to try to do. I'm hearing that Kasten may be interested. And I guess the question is, OADP folks, what are the clouds that you're most interested in? And same with the Dell folks. Yeah.
Hearing it, here's my problem with, first of all, I don't disagree with anything you're saying, David. I think that this makes a lot of sense. And I want to hear about those use cases that this is like a performance solution for what you guys need. But I have problems if we're coming at this from the angle of like, well, the technical implementation of this CSI snapshotter causes problems, because then we're not really solving this from like a native Kubernetes API level. We're not
going to be able to. I mean, we can, but it's not going to be performant in a number of cases.
But if we start from the Kubernetes API, right, you can always build upon this to support these individual. And I think this actually gets tied into a lot of the discussion which I found very fascinating last time we talked about this, in terms of what Astrolabe's value add is for different data providers and stuff like that. I don't necessarily see why there has to be a disconnect in terms of, okay, we're targeting the Kubernetes API. Well, this storage provider needs X, Y, and Z to make this more performant. Like, why can't that be built on top of it for that specific data mover? If we're targeting the Kubernetes API and then we're saying, bring your own data mover, a vSphere data mover can be more performant for vSphere. An AWS data mover can be more performant for AWS. But you can't design something specifically for one of these providers, right? And the only way that Kubernetes has abstracted this is at the CSI level.
So one thing is that if this doesn't work well on vSphere, I'll leave my VMware hat on, right? I should throw it away. But if we design something that doesn't actually work well for VMware, I don't see why VMware would be interested in doing this. You guys can correct me, but it doesn't seem like a great idea.
Is this a VMware? Is this a VMware project? I mean, that's the problem that I'm hearing. It's like, why? I mean, that's actually
VMware is one of the major use cases, isn't it? I mean, from my point of view, from the Kasten side, what are you interested in supporting?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll give you the ODP use case, right? Here's the biggest problem that we have, and actually why we need this today. So from OpenShift's perspective, there is a product called OpenShift Container Storage. It's FFS, it's running on cluster, right? If I take a snapshot, a CSI snapshot, and I know that you said that, different file system and disk arrays can handle this differently. Ceph is a good example of this, right? You take a snapshot in CephFS, that snapshot lives on cluster. There's no actual protection if your cluster goes through a disaster scenario. So we need to be able to push that snapshot elsewhere, right? This is all coming from the native Kubernetes API. We just want to target a CSI snapshot and make it portable and durable, right? How that data movement occurs, there's a zillion ways to do it. There's probably something that's more specific for Ceph that could work, and we could target Ceph specifically, but I don't want to. I mean, that's not my goal here. Just like how Rustic takes the larger broad picture of how do I back up a file system, and it's not perfect and it's actually less performant than a lot of other solutions. It's a one size fits all solution, right? If we target CSI and then you can bring your own data mover, then the storage that backs it, you can have a more performant data mover for those given providers, right? And I think that the biggest frustration we're always targeting vSphere for these solutions.
Yeah,
not
actually,
really a community project.
Actually, not only the vSphere has this problem. Actually, lots of other storage has this problem. For example, the Ceph also has this problem. So by that I mean we need to have two passes. The first is normal path, like we mount the snapshot, the CSS snapshot, like the snapshot and read the data from inside the pod. And the other is we use the direct access way. But I personally, I don't think this, they are independent from each other. I don't think we need to run or develop them together or something like that. So my question is why we are concerning these two passes, because we can do both paths in parallel, or one after another.
I would be interested if we could write a interface that would be able to give a generic controller the ability to tell the more specific ones, like you were saying, the parallel paths, because that would allow Velero, in my mind, if I'm putting on my, like, how are we going to write a controller that will actually be able to tell the data mover to do things, tell during a Velero backup to do all those things, like. At the end of the day, the user interface to this should probably be the backup, and the backup controller should be telling the information on this. So a generic interface that would allow us to go to a specific thing that says, hey, do your whatever, your movement, based on whatever is performant for you. Like you were saying, right? Those are two parallel paths, like each one can do their own thing. I agree with that, but I think the more generic, like interface, so that the controller can both request the data movement of things as well as see information about the data movement, so that it can report back errors, information, warnings, status on how the data movement is going. These types of things on the backup CR, because I think that's probably, if we're just looking at it from like a holistic user experience perspective, that's probably where the user would want that information to live, in my mind. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's kind of where my head was at.
Guys, I think we are discussing the implementation, but originally we were talking about the requirement, right?
Yeah, so I think there's a requirement that we be able to do a performance solution, and the CSI stuff to me is a fallback. Some systems it works well, many systems it does not. vSphere is a prime example because, and that's an example for Red Hat as well. You've got a lot of OpenShift on vSphere.
Yeah,
So, if we come up with a solution that doesn't work well, that's probably not great.
No, that's not what I'm saying. The point is that yes, CSI is a catch-all because that's what Kubernetes is developing, right? There's nothing stopping you from taking a specific data mover for that's actually the goal that I specified here is like you should be able to bring your own data mover. You have a vSphere data mover, which you guys have for vSphere, and obviously that's going to be valuable to everyone in the community that's running on vSphere. We should be able to consume that, right? But we should not be locking ourselves into providing a solution that only targets specific.
I agree. It should definitely not. So one of the things that I wanted to be able to do though was reuse the data mover infrastructure for doing different types of objects and potentially having different things coexisting together, reusing the backend repo structure, all that stuff. So that's why I was going down the Aspillade path, which is more like a set of different drivers that can sit on, that can be consumed by the data mover. So that the data mover is kind of a generic thing. It could be completely replaced, but it doesn't really need to. So if you say, geez, vSphere, let's do a better, faster thing for you, should you have to build a whole data mover, or should you just build the control and data paths that let you snapshot and extract data?
Yes, I completely agree with that sentiment. That's exactly
so that's,
what we're going with.
yeah. So that's kind of my thinking. And then I would say that block level backups for volumes are something that have to be there in the design from the beginning, because we're going to hit this very quickly.
But I'm probably coming to this because I don't necessarily understand a lot of specifically how block level backups are working specifically for vSphere itself. But when I take a snapshot, well, I guess let me ask the question: a vSphere CSI snapshot, what exactly happens under the hood? Does it not integrate with the block level backup system?
Yes, it does. Well, it doesn't integrate with the block level backup. It creates a block level snapshot. Now, this is the same as with EBS or anybody else. You get back a snapshot handle into the volume snapshot contents. And then you can go to the storage system and you can get access to the contents of the snapshot. Or you can create a new volume from that volume snapshot. That's the Kubernetes CSI way, but that involves cloning the volume. So it goes to CSI, it says, hey, please make a clone of this disk. And then depending on your back end, that may be very quick, or it may be very slow, or somewhere in between, or maybe, just expensive.
Okay, Dave, do you have some, specific data for the performance degradation about, every storage, like,
I can't give you everyone. I mean, vSphere, I will tell you, is going to make a complete copy of the snapshot. It's going to make a new volume, copy every block into it. So however long that takes is however long it takes, but you basically negated any speed up from change block tracking because you've already copied the disk once.
Yeah, I understand that. And also for Ceph, it says that for 60 GB of data, it takes half an hour to prepare the snapshot. But I'm just trying to know for various storage, like for the very large enterprise storage, what is the performance degradation for them? Maybe when they do some optimization from the storage side, there is not so much degradation. That is something I'm imagining, but I'm not quite sure about that. So that is also my question, that whether the direct path is very important and or it is less important. We can just focus on the normal path first, then we go to the direct path. That is the question I'm currently having, try to figure out.
So the direct path isn't that hard. I implemented it for EBS. It's about 500 lines of code.
Yeah, it's not hard, but we need to develop a specific solution for every storage. That is a problem.
Well, what you do is you have both. So you have the generic solution that works everywhere. And then you have plugins that can replace that with faster solutions where available. And so then you can say,
Yeah, but then I sorry to cut you off, but I think then we need to decide how, because currently in vSphere plugin, everything is compiled together. But for the direct data path, we allow vendors to implement, in my word, the way you access the snapshot, then how we keep that out of place a question. Is that possible we do that via gRPC? I'm not very sure. I'm quite new to this.
So I have the code sitting out. I did gRPC plugins for Astrolabe. I need to put the PR in for it. But that would let us not have everything compiled together, because that is not good and not extendable.
So I think I'm just curious that whether we can do the normal path first, and then we on the design, even on the design level, and then we consider, because if we do them together and design them together, that will be a very large scope.
It's not that bad, but if we do, so we can do two paths, right? So one is file level backup, and the other is block level backup.
But
and
even,
we can get.
Yeah, I think even in general paths,
yeah,
the portal provided the block mount mode, right?
Yeah,
we can go with both file system level and block level.
Yeah, that is what I mean. From the functionality level, we don't miss anything for the normal path. I mean, for the common path, generic path, but we lose some performance. So
we may lose a lot of performance, but
yeah, I agree.
So you need to be able to. So it can't be like spaghetti threaded together, where you can't separate it out. So that's what I'm saying, is it has to be separable so that you can do plugins easily, and it shouldn't be like implement a whole DataMover unless like this DataMover is a framework that you can easily modify. Because I think implementing a whole new DataMover is a fair amount of work. And if you're going to ask Pure to implement a new DataMover for Velero, that's it's a fair bit of work.
So
I need to ask the larger question here of, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the primary goals here was targeting how to bring the CSI plugin to GA. That's fair, right? So I hear a lot of discussion about performance specific improvements for storage providers. That makes a lot of sense to me. But at the end of the day, we still have this fundamental gap with CSI, with the current CSI plugin, that it's not providing enough functionality to bring it to GA. And when I think about data movement, I'm trying to come at it from that angle. If we're targeting, if the fundamental problem is that you're saying CSI snapshots are, you lose performance with specific storage providers, and that's a fair statement. In fact, a lot of people complain about that. Aren't we still not solving that problem by trying to work around that limitation and say, well, for this specific provider, we need a solution that works for this because the way that it works, it's not performing. We're not actually fixing the problem that the CSI plugin is introducing.
Well, I would say, wait, I can at least take, well, I want to take a first stab first. I would say I don't quite agree with that. Yeah, the question is, where do folks want to use CSI the CSI plugin? We have the durable cases, AWS and Azure, and we're bringing that to GA in this quarter, and that gives us security benefits, yay. But I would argue that that covers AWS and Azure. GCP I don't know about, but I'm actually assuming it's probably durable. We should figure that out. I should know that. Then what are the other cases? For us, we hear a ton about vSphere. I mean, we're VMware, so we hear more of the vSphere cases. But besides vSphere, I actually don't know of any, I mean, I have not heard commonly, if at all, any other examples of non-durable CSI snapshots. Now, it sounds like you might have an example, so that's good to know. But I'm just saying that, yes, we can't totally bring the CSI plugin to GA for non-durable bits yet, but that's not a huge problem yet for us. And so if at least from my perspective, if we're going to do that, it would be good to get additional benefits. But this is where let's talk about it. Maybe there are these non-durable cases besides vSphere that I don't know about.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem from my perspective is what we're essentially saying is we're going to have to start knocking away at the most commonly used storage providers that implement CSI, as opposed to coming at this from the angle of CSI itself as an interface. The snapshot gets taken and stored on that given storage provider. We want to be able to pick it up and move it, right? It's like we can play whack-a-mole and target individual cloud providers, but it's not coming at it from solving it at the CSI level, right?
I mean, the thing is, there's only N cloud providers. There's like 3 major cloud providers that you got to cover, and really 2. And you can push things like the vSphere implementation. My plan was always to push that to the vSphere team and have them support that, but have it plug into Velero.
Yes,
And
but I'm saying like non-cloud provider storage.
Yeah.
Just to be clear,
So
right, it's not cloud providers that we're targeting. It's any CSI driver provider. There are many other types of storage systems that provide CSI drivers that we are attempting to do. This isn't just clouds. Working on the CSI level allows us to integrate with anybody who has created a CSI driver. It's a
so that's your
standardized
fallback position. So you want to have that path. But then the first thing, as soon as you ship that path, that path has to be extensible, because as soon as you ship that path, we already know we're going to get people complaining about performance. So that's why I'm saying build in that as a requirement.
Disagreeing with that though, right? All I've asked, I think, is to make a DataMover interface that could be extensible, but starts out with like a way for us to drive data movement, right? And we probably just want to start with CSI because it's the most, like you were saying, the most ubiquitous one, right? And yeah, like it totally needs to be extensible. That needs to be part of the goals, that it should be extensible. I totally agree. That makes 100% sense. But I think that let's just start with CSI because one is the most ubiquitous, like we just described. It would allow us to catch every single driver out there that provides storage out of tree to Kubernetes, which is the main way that everybody's providing storage now, right? If I am misunderstanding the way that things are going, I think all of the drivers are moving out of tree. So everybody will be providing CSI at this point, right? I think it makes a lot of sense just to start with CSI, get the one, and then make it extensible so that, like you were saying, like there's going to be people that need more performance ones. I don't think anybody here is disagreeing with that or the need for it. I think what we're saying is like, let's start with CSI because it will get us the most bang for our buck. Let's start with it, but let's keep in mind that we need to extend it or make it extensible, make it so that we can plug it in. And then let's start from like the user experience perspective of how a user would want to use a data movement. In my mind, that's through a backup CR that they can see all this information, they can choose stuff. Like those are part of the design that are going to be super important as well, not just the how do we extend the thing. And we can get a lot of work done on those types of things just by starting with CSI and then moving from there, right? Like I think like that's can we agree on moving forward with that as our base requirement and then extending it, making sure that we add extensibility as a goal and bring it into the design?
I put extensibility as a goal up front, because if you don't design it in from the beginning, it invariably gets spaghetti threaded together, and then you have you can't undo it, and you have to like do a version 2 where you redo everything.
Yes, I agree 100%. I definitely think that needs to be clearly cut, but there was like a clarification of we need to be targeting specific providers and their file systems and their block storage things. That's coming at it from a, why don't we just leave it as it can be extensible to support those things? We don't need to be.
So I would say that, yeah, you keep that in mind. I think that CSI is a reasonable place to start, but out of the box, you're going to get hit with it almost immediately. Like, hey, we don't like this snap and clone thing.
Well, can we fulfill both? So first of all, I mean, from the vSphere perspective, well, representing some of the engineers from VMware, I would like to, actually ignoring that part, I would like to see more bang for my buck, as you said, Sean, and I would, at least the users I am seeing are vSphere users generally and AWS and Azure users, but they're not relevant because they've got the durable snapshot. So for us, like looking at actual users I know of who might use this, for me, I'm seeing folks generally on vSphere, and to Dave's point, I think they might want more performant. But I totally recognize that you all OEDP folks I think are seeing a more generic use case. Could we develop in parallel? Is there a way to have a design that does upfront satisfy both our needs, and the Red Hat folks can maybe do more of the, you can work on a part that's more relevant to you, and then VMware folks can work on something that might support vSphere a bit more. Is that possible to get both at the same time, or do we truly have to choose?
B +1, Eleanor. I think that's actually what I was. That's what I'm trying to suggest, is that
Great.
we develop I 100% agree. And I'm really sorry if I'm doing a poor job of stating it that way. But when I'm saying an interface, what I kind of mean is a common way for something to drive data movement. Because at the end of the day, something needs to drive these data movers. So as we make it extensible, it needs to have something that can drive it. And we want to make those things the extensibility point. And that's like the interface that I'm kind of referring to. I apologize if this is in my head and not really written down.
Well, I want to clarify some wording in that document, because maybe this is where it's getting lost, is when I say bring a third party can bring their own data mover, like I'm implying that that's vSphere, that's EBS, like anyone that's not Kubernetes specific, because we're a Kubernetes specific backup provider here. That's what Velero is, right? If you have a data mover that works better for a given storage provider, you should be able to bring that in and consume it. So from the beginning, we absolutely want to support an extensible design that enables someone to bring in a specific data mover that's performant for their storage provider.
So
can I ask a very quick, wait, can I ask a clarifying question for me and maybe others as well? Are there two ways you can make it extensible, where someone brings a whole data mover, maybe a vSphere data mover or EBS data mover, or just everyone uses the same data mover and then the hookup at the end is different? Are there basically more than one way to make this extensible? Okay.
That's what we need to decide.
Thank you. Okay. So, and what would be that little hookup at the end? I get what, when we say we bring a whole data mover, what would you say to make the end hookup different?
That's what I would advocate for. That was the Astrolabe model. And that's what we have in the existing vSphere data mover. So it's about, I don't know, at least 50% non-vSphere specific. It's very abstract. It doesn't work in terms of vSphere disks. And and the fact that the vSphere driver is relatively large is an artifact of V80P, and it's not an artifact of being a driver. So the EBS version of that is like 500 lines. And it works with EBS, it works with the existing data mover. The data mover needs a few tweaks because some vSpherisms crept in, but in general, it's just like, hey, move this object from here to there, thanks. And it gets a data path back from the Astrolabe layer and says, I'm going to copy bits.
Yeah, and I have.
Actually, Yonghui, I had cut off Yonghui before when I asked my question. Yonghui, do you want to chime in, and then we'll have Dylan next? And
no, I think you have already asked my question. So it's the same thing actually. So for data movement, we have the data mover to interact with the workload, and we have the repository. So in order to consider make everything in the picture, we need also consider the repository. So we can give you the third part vendor to replace the data mover. But what about the repository? That's the thing we need to consider.
Yeah. So in the existing vSphere data mover, the repository is pluggable. So we can actually plug the Copia POC into it.
Yeah, so that means the data mover is pluggable and the repository is pluggable.
And the API and the object API is pluggable. Right. So you can use different. You can have it, do a clone and attach to get access, or it can go through the direct APIs. Doesn't really matter. The end result is you want to get a stream out.
So don't we already have object storage definitions that exist today in Velero that is pluggable?
So the problem with the object store is not really good for storing like incrementals and stuff. So that's the problem that we ran into when we built out the vSphere data mover and the vSphere plugin, is that the tricky part. So the naive way, which is where I started, is just copy all the blocks into an S3 object. That's good. The difficulty is incrementals are really difficult then, because if you do like incrementals is the changes from a previous one, and you want to delete the snapshot in the middle of a chain, it's like you've got to do all this, messing about. Whereas something like Copia is handling that versioning for us on top of the object store. And
Yeah, you need to manage the backup chain for incremental. And I mean,
so having like a repository API that lets you talk about things in terms of here's an object, here's a snapshot for that object, and you push the details of how that gets in the object store or in some legacy provider thing, you push that behind that API, it gets a lot easier because talking directly with the object store is basically you have to put Copia on top of it in order to really make it work for incrementals.
I think we can bring that abstraction extensibility step by step. For example, I don't think make the repository configurable is P0. It doesn't block us implementing the end-to-end scenario.
No, but if you have an API, so you don't have to actually do it, but if the API is there so you can, that's what I would argue for.
By the API, you mean the Kubernetes API?
No, the API to the repository, so that is pluggable. It may not be implemented, but you haven't like threaded Copia through the rest of everything.
How would that be different than our current enhancing your current object storage plugins to do that, Dave?
So we might be able to, but so the current object storage plugin basically is a one-to-one mapping between the object store and the API. So it doesn't have any concept of here, I'm giving you a new version of this object. So, we'd have to, so object stores don't let you do that really, right? It's like here, you wrote an object, yeah, that's pretty much immutable. Now I'm going to write another object with a different name, which is how we use it. So we pretty much need to have a repo, an API for the repo that deals with snapshot chains. So objects, chains of snapshots for the object so that we can keep the diffs.
Can I ask a quick question? I asked in the chat, but are we talking about two different sets of APIs? Like the DataMover, I'm assuming would have APIs that would be called, you take the snapshot and then you call the DataMover APIs to get it to move it. But then at the other hand, when it's interacting with the repo, then we have a repo set of APIs? So basically, do we have a source APIs and destination APIs, or is it DataMover APIs and repo APIs? Or is it not clear yet?
So I'll give you my model, which is that we have essentially two repos. One would be the local repo, and one would be the remote repo, the source and the destination repo. They're actually the same. And the DataMover API sits on top of those. So you can say to the DataMover, move it from A to B. And it gets an A.
Wait, so the source can have a repo. I thought a repo was only okay. I thought repo was only when you're putting data into a data, but you're saying it could be a repo at the source as well.
If you step back a little bit and you make them both the same, it actually gets a lot easier because you say, hey, I have a snapshot that I'm moving from repo A to repo B. And the API is similar.
Sorry, please go ahead.
Well, that's my model. So, and we implemented that model and it works.
And sorry, I should be clear. Of course, we don't want to get too much into implementation in this discussion, but if it does inform requirements, then okay. But that answers my question for now. Thank you.
Right. So it doesn't. Dylan, so that doesn't interfere with replacing the DataMover, but the IDs and stuff have to be something that we can take a snapshot, pass it all the way to the DataMover, and have it make sense on both ends.
When you say have it make sense on both ends, can you tell me with that? Like you mean on restore?
Well, no, between the snapshot mechanism that we use, which presumably is going to be CSI, but eventually it might be other things, not volume snapshots. So we would want to be, so whatever it is, whatever snapshot ID, so we've got a two-phase thing. We've got a snapshot that we're taking in that's under Valero's control. And then we're having a data movement where Velero has to go from what it took a snapshot of to telling the DataMover to do it. And so that ID that was returned originally has to be something that the DataMover understands. It may be trivial, but it has to work that way.
The ID, sorry, I'm not, so when I say, hey, DataMover, move this data, you're saying that the value that I pass there needs to be understood by both the DataMover and the Kubernetes layer?
Or the snapshotting layer, whatever actually took the snapshot. And it's probably trivial, but it's just, it just needs to go across.
Wouldn't it, correct? I'm sorry if this is a super naive question. Wouldn't that just be the snapshot or the volume snapshot contents?
Yes, if all we're doing are volumes, but I'd like to have us open up for other things in the future.
I think the topics are drifted. We were talking about the requirements. But
Yeah, well, and that's where I'm, and this is where I'm less clear on, yes, on what is related to requirements and whatnot. On a side note, at least for me, I'm going to drop in 13 minutes. I don't know how folks feel. I can leave the recording going if folks want to discuss longer, but thank you. Okay. Anyway, okay. So I guess the question would be, so certainly I'll schedule another discussion a week from now. I think part of the question is, where do we move from here? I don't know, actually. I'm trying to drive this, so.
I personally think that what we need to do is, like we were talking about with requirements, is to really hone those down. So it seems like we have an open question on, or is a requirement some information, or is a requirement a CSI snapshot? I think early on, Dylan, myself, and I think maybe some others were arguing that, you know, the CSI snapshot, volume snapshot, contents, the Kubernetes layer, that what it gives us is what we should be working on. I think I'm hearing that there's another requirement that may or may not be there, that we want to open it up to things. Is that a fair assessment of the difference that we had in that last little exchange, Dave?
I think so. So long term, yeah, I'd like to have the ability to put other things through it. It doesn't have to be, you know, phase one, but if we design it right, it's not that hard.
But and is that the same discussion as what we were having about prioritizing any solution, kind of a more generic any solution for that's a different discussion, right? Than the prioritizing a generic any solution versus a more specific performance solution for certain clouds, correct? Like Sean, you're just highlighting. To me, there's several just open questions. Like, so one of them is
and I think like start with the requirements, right? Like I totally think that this is where so once we get these requirements down, we could then we can scope the design, right? And then once we scope the design, then we can actually go and make the design. So I think the requirement that we talked through initially that I think we all agree on is that whatever does the data movement needs to be extensible in some way, so that systems that have extra requirements or things that they need to do need to be able to handle that. I think there's a open question requirement around change blocks. That seems to be another sticking point that we've been stuck on. Eleanor, if you, I'll go.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because I'm so tired.
Totally
I'm a morning person. I'm not trying to take notes.
I know that I'm just brain dumping. I think I'm just trying to get everything out and see if anybody disagrees with either an open question or a requirement that we did agree to. So I think we did agree on whatever data mover is, it needs to be extensible so that other things can do that. There's two open questions in my mind: is does data movement support other things that will just push through it, or is it only working on CSI and volume snapshots? And then the next question is, do we need to support change blocks in the beginning, or are we?
So I'll note that see the green that Eleanor is scrolling up and down, that actually says that there's already a requirement here that we need to support VADP and CV and vSphere snapshots.
Well, let's note this was called out by Xing. So this, I think that this also shows different needs. This is where OEDP at least doesn't agree. I haven't really thought about whether to put Velero may or may not need. So yeah. I guess I want to call it a general. Yeah.
I don't disagree. I'm wondering if this need can be behind the question. I think that would come out of the requirements, right? Is does that need allow? Is that provided by the extensibility of the data movement, or do we need to bake that into the core upstream data mover thing that we build, right?
So bake what in is the question. So bake in the capability or bake in provider X?
I think it's that we bake in the extensibility. That's my
we shouldn't be baking in providers, right?
I would agree with that. I would
Yeah.
agree with that. Our solution should
Okay.
be able to handle, the reasonable set of providers, though.
I agree,
So,
and I think that's
and not baked in, but
what-
just architecturally, you say, yeah, here's this problem, here's that problem. Let's see if we can fit that together in the architecture. And hey, vSphere, that's your problem to implement that.
I think that's exactly what I was trying to say, right? Is that like if does the data mover itself have to work on change blocks as a method, or can the underlying thing inside the data mover extensible piece work on change blocks or not work on change blocks, right?
So the
Like
change block stuff
we can
pretty simple. And one opportunity we have here is to prototype this before it actually gets into CSI.
What I would be really wary of, and I don't know if other people agree or not, what I'm really wary of is going and prototyping something and then it not being even close to what they get, right?
That's
That
why
will make
we
it very
prototype it.
hard.
So we get Phong involved, for example, we prototype it. So there's not a lot to CBT. It's a list of blocks that changed, and you run over it, and as you copy, and you say, do I want this block? No, let me skip ahead, right? It's pretty simple. And so
Right.
the thing is that what we don't want them to do is to implement a CBT that actually doesn't work. So it's an opportunity to prototype that and say, this is the one that actually works. This is why you should do it this way.
May I just
Potentially.
jump in? I mean, we're going a little deeper into specifics, and of course, I think a lot of us are tired and we're kind of wrapping up. Maybe a meta, again, ending with a meta thing might be worthwhile. I don't know about all of you, and actually, it's a question. I don't think Velero team has ever really had to deal with this kind of big differences in opinion for a large feature before. It's always just been VMware folk for, I think, the big features. And then lately we've been working on small features together in a bigger group, but it's been pretty easy. So I guess one question I have is, I want to call it, I think that there's just gonna be a lot more discussion as we figure this out. This is a first occurrence of the Velero team. And I guess my question is, for folks who have ever seen this on other open source projects, this kind of lots of different opinions and having to align on a design, are we doing the right thing? Are there things we can do differently? Or are we just right to schedule a bunch of discussions, talk a bunch, keep documenting, revise?
Yeah,
I want to
based
just
on my
let the last
experience,
5 minutes basically, yeah, like let's maybe last 5 minutes, is there a way that we can do better, or are we on the right track? So yeah,
But-
I think Daniel, you were saying
based on
something.
my experience, if we continue like this, based on my own experience, it's gonna take very long, like 2 years to have something finalized. We had this in the Notary V2 work group. It's not very effective, to be honest.
Well, I also think, to add to that, like there's a limitation when we have to. Well, first of all, I think breaking to a working group will improve this process significantly, because I think that the people who have a vested interest in this and are potentially working on this day to day, we can drive it forward more asynchronously than having to discuss this all in a large call. So I think that's going to improve the process. I mean, I think that this is a great lively debate. There's a lot of stuff that I'm learning and listening to here. So I think there's nothing wrong with what we're doing right here. I do agree with Daniel that if the process is going to be, we meet once a week and have to hash out ideas that, get really deep in the weeds, it's going to be tough. But if we can form a working group, we get, some Slack channel or something to discuss this, or there's a lot more of asynchronous communication, I think that might improve a lot of this. Because, for example, like I'm hearing a lot of debate about requirements. I'm going to have to go back and listen and retype a lot of this stuff because I just haven't been able to do both at the same time. If we have this conversation in Slack, I'm like, look, these are my requirements. Do you agree with this? That conversation is like saved and threaded. It's actually a really good tool for asynchronous communication, and the Google Doc can do that as well, obviously. So I don't know if that made sense. But
Yeah, I
think it'd be.
please go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Personally, I think the first thing we need to do is have a formalized, a concrete, end-to-end, well-defined requirement, and we all agree on. I think the debate happened in this discussion. It's great, but many of them are related to how we implement things. It's not about how user use it.
So actually quickly on that, I should just advertise, since I didn't get to that. I tried to do some use cases, an end-to-end, which might be kind of what Daniel's suggesting. So on to his point, I agree. If we talk from the user's point of view, we may dive less into implementation details. Folks may want to take a look. You might be able to use this and add kind of thens and whatevers to kind of get a more complete use case. Or to Daniel's point, maybe someone else can try writing a separate end-to-end use case. I will try to be involved, but you all have more technical knowledge than me on this. So let me, I'm sorry, I interrupted Daniel. I agree with him. Keep going, Daniel.
No, I finished. Thanks.
Okay.
I'll just say too, those use cases at the bottom of this doc, or I guess it's the middle or whatever. There's a lot of things that were discussed today that I think kind of delved outside of those use cases, and so if we can explicitly narrow down what's highest priority in tackling these problems, which I don't know, you clearly started to do with the P0, P1 stuff. I mean, that would go a very long way. Yeah. Well, I actually agreed with what you wrote there. The P0 stuff is exactly what we're trying to target here from the Red Hat side. So if there's disagreement there, I think that's a good place to start.
I 100%
we brought up a lot of things today that don't have anything to do with those P0 stores. So
well, just to be clear, I had not really thought about performance and understood all the implications. I may, from the VMware Velero hat side, or the VMware, representing the VMware developers, I may need to, I have to figure out what we need to prioritize our development work on. But from a design perspective, if we can kind of get both, that's great. But good. I like the, you go, please. I've been cutting off.
Yeah, no, I think the biggest question open then that I think that we disagree on from a larger requirements perspective is given the basic backup of CSI snapshot versus like the last one that you had there, which is like I want CVT to work. Does that have to happen at the DataMover layer, or does that happen at the extensible piece of the DataMover, right? And that's where I think we have the biggest disagreement, and I think that's where we need to come to a consensus. And from there, I think everything will flow out of that. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's where it seems to me to be the biggest source of disagreement. And then I think, Dave, I don't even see anything about like generic things in these stories. I could have been wrong on my quick parsing of it, but we probably want to add a story for that, because that seems to be one of the things that you're thinking of as well. And we would need then agreement on, is that a extensible thing? Is that part of like the main data movement concept? I think those are the two main disagreements. And I think those are like healthy debates to have. But I'm hoping that once we get agreement on those, then we can move forward much quicker. And it won't take 2 years, hopefully.
We hope. So I see we're at time. I want to kind of correct one thing, by the way, or not correct. Dave, by the way, had no chance to put use cases and he didn't have access. And the Velero team, or the VMware developers have not had a chance to look at these use cases either. So just be aware that the use cases might change even from the VMware developers. I just wrote them literally right before this meeting. So I think action item is, let's keep maybe working on this doc, plus doing, I like Dylan's call it, of more async communication in the channel. We do have a full week before we'll have our next sit down meeting. So let's challenge ourselves to make as much progress as possible async. Younghui, I see you called a question in the chat. So you might want to put it in the doc or in the Velero.
Yeah, maybe we can put it in the open discussion in the doc. The question is like, we need to consider, maybe we consider offline, when we allow the third party to integrate with their own DataMover, what is our purpose? To support their specific way of moving data, or just support their own repository? Maybe we need to consider this, and that will be impacting our design, the overall design.
Yeah, good call out. Definitely put it in open questions. That's great. Yeah, because of course we'll lose it. The Zoom chat, of course, is ephemeral. Thank you all. Again, I think that we're trying to do a hard thing, and we are not only trying to solve the hard problem, but we are trying to figure out how to talk about the hard problem. So if we all have patience, I think we're going to start to see progress as we figure out at least the meta part. So thank you all, folks. Yep, and Dylan is calling out, of course. If people don't have the right access, please poke him. So I'm going to end this meeting now, but definitely let's keep chatting. And I'll send out the invites tomorrow for next week's in-person chats. Any last comments before we drop?
I just want to say thank you to Eleanor for driving this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
I know that we have lots of big opinions and big personalities. So thank you for keeping us on task.
Well, my pleasure for trying. It's an awkward situation where you all have more technical knowledge than I do, but I am excited to be involved in this. Thank you. So
Thank you,
very
Ariel,
good.
and thank
Thanks
you.
everyone.
Thank
Thanks
you for
Adam.
the-
Thanks, everybody. See you later.
Thank
See
you.
ya.
Bye, folks.
Bye-bye.